What is going on, you beautiful humans? Welcome back to the channel. And today we are tackling the hot button economic issue that is impacting businesses and consumers alike. And it comes down to, are tariffs driving up prices, and is this inflationary? Because it's supposed to just really create a one-time price increase, as we've heard, but it seems that this is a moving target. And of course, are they a necessary tool for boosting domestic production? And of course, the answers, as you'll see, as far as I can tell, are not very simple. And I want to look at the arguments on both sides and look at the latest inflation data as well to discuss the very real challenges of shifting manufacturing back to the US and really address the debate around that the government's incentive from previous administration when it comes to the CHIPS Act. Now, of course, let's start with the basics. And I mentioned in another video that tariffs are taxes imposed on imported goods. I think we've got that idea down, and really the idea behind them is often to make foreign products more expensive, thereby incentivizing consumers and businesses to buy goods made in the US. And of course, this in theory should boost domestic manufacturing and create jobs. But here's the issue. The global economy is incredibly interconnected, and many small businesses rely on foreign suppliers for components or finished products, and they don't always have readily available US alternatives. It's not as easy as just switching to a domestic supplier, and even products labeled made in the USA are often containing parts that are sourced overseas. So what happens when tariffs increase the cost of these imported goods is that businesses can really end up facing a tough choice. They either absorb the higher cost, which eats into their profits, or they pass that cost on to the consumers through higher prices. And if they want to stay in business, they typically pretty much have to pass that on. And here's the thing. I personally know of businesses in my area that are manufacturing in the US, but they've still raised prices 10 to 20% just to start. But let's actually just talk about inflation, because we just got that latest CPI, the Consumer Price Index report, and it showed some signs of slowing down. However, a significant portion of that recent decrease in inflation seems to be driven by falling energy prices. But aside from that, there is a crucial question to ask. Is the decrease in inflation partly due to reduced consumer spending? And is it really coming down to people just buying less because things are simply either too expensive, or they're trying to cut back to save more because of the uncertainty ahead? And if that's the case, it's not exactly a sign of a healthy economy. So what we could be seeing is a demand side slowdown, which could have its own set of problems. So while lower inflation is welcome, yeah, celebrate it, we do need to look at the underlying factors to really get to that full picture. And I do not even think that we're there yet, and it might take a little while. But this brings us to the challenge of reshoring manufacturing. The idea of bringing jobs back to the US is appealing, but the reality is incredibly complex. You can't just snap your fingers and build a state-of-the-art factory overnight. And here's what we're up against. Existing facilities, many of these older manufacturing facilities are just outdated. They may need to be completely demolished and rebuilt to accommodate modern production processes. So really, this involves a significant cost, the time, and the regulatory hurdles like zoning and environmental permits. You also have to think about retooling and construction. So even if existing facilities can be salvaged, they often require extensive retooling and construction. The new machinery, the updated infrastructure, and specialized layouts that are needed. And then there's the supply chain development. You need an entire ecosystem to support manufacturing. That means a network of domestic suppliers for raw materials, components, and specialized services. Building the supply chain takes time and investment. Now, there's also the skilled labor shortage, which we keep hearing about. So manufacturing requires skilled workforce. We need to invest more in training and education programs to develop the talent needed to operate these facilities. It's not going to just be all AI and bots. I don't care what you're hearing. There is still going to be a need for skilled labor. So here's the big one though. Demand. This is a big one. For manufacturing to be viable in the US, there needs to be sufficient demand from businesses for domestically produced goods. And this may take quite a bit of time as businesses adjust to new sourcing options. And then, of course, there's a question of cost. So let's actually just talk about the cost of building a manufacturing plant. It's a major factor in why so much production has shifted overseas. While costs vary significantly depending on the industry, the scale, and of course the location, a general rundown is that in the United States, Building a manufacturing facility in the US typically involves higher costs. And of course, that is due to higher labor costs, a stringent environmental regulation, which I know is being toyed with in the current administration. Then there's also, of course, the land costs and then the construction costs. And then, of course, flipping that back over to China, historically, China has offered lower costs. And that, of course, is due to lower labor costs, less stringent regulations, government incentives, and they already have established industrial parks and supply chains there. However, the cost gap is narrowing. Wages in China they're actually starting to rise. And there's other factors such as geopolitical risks and supply chain disruptions that are making US manufacturing more competitive in some sectors. And it's not as simple as saying it's always cheaper overseas, but the upfront investment for building a new plant in the US can really be significantly higher. And then, of course, this brings us to the CHIPS Act that has been panned recently and that broader debate around the government incentives. While the CHIPS Act does aim to boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing by providing funding to large companies, there is a crucial point often overlooked, and that is the impact on small businesses. And there are several debates about whether these large incentives are the best approach. And the current administration argues that they aren't necessary or effective. But we need to argue the point that small businesses are the ones that are in the crosshairs in this situation. So let's actually shift this to the small business for a second, because it's these businesses that are buying much of these raw materials or finished goods wholesale to be able to sell these either to individual customers, or they may even partner with a larger retailer for a higher volume turnaround. However, small businesses often operate on thinner margins and have less capital to absorb increased costs. They also face unique challenges in navigating the complexities of tariffs and really shifting supply chains. So to illustrate this point, let's actually look at the tax burden on small businesses compared to large corporations. Typically, small businesses, that tax burden is that the small business, which often operates as a pass-through entity, whether it's a sole proprietor, partnerships, S corporations, are typically taxed at the individual income tax rate of their owners. These rates vary, but can be substantial. And the large corporations, on the other hand, are subject to the corporate income tax, while the corporate tax rate is lower than that highest individual income tax rate. And then those large corporations often having more resources and sophisticated strategies to minimize their tax liability through deductions, credits, and plenty of loopholes. So this means that in some cases, small businesses can face a proportionally higher tax burden than larger corporations, making it even harder for them to compete in a market where tariffs are driving up their costs. So, while incentives for large corporations can play a role in boosting domestic manufacturing, it's equally important to support small businesses, which are the backbone of this economy, especially during a transition like this. And I personally would love to see more manufacturing here, because I was going to develop a product that was in the tech space, and I would have loved to be able to just jump in the car and drive, or jump on a quick flight to check out like a product sample. Instead, I had to actually look overseas, wait for the samples to come in, and it took weeks for those samples to come in. And then if I needed to make some tweaks, then, we had to like send that feedback to them and then wait a couple more weeks to get another set of samples. And like I said, if I were able to do this in person much more easily in the US, that would have been a huge win. So if tariffs aren't the only answer, what are some alternative ways to encourage businesses, especially small businesses, to manufacture in the US? And then, of course, tax incentives. And I know many don't like this idea of giving tax breaks to businesses, but hear me out, because this isn't typically a billionaire situation. This is someone who's probably exhausted loan options, put a second mortgage on their home, or even worse, they've borrowed money from family. But offering targeted tax breaks to small businesses that build new manufacturing facilities in the US or expand existing ones could be a path that does incentivize them. This could include deductions for relocation expenses, retooling costs, or job creation. And the thing is, the tax incentive could also be offset by the payroll taxes of the labor that they hire. That's just a thought. Now, there are also grants and subsidies, and providing direct financial support with a focus on small and medium-sized enterprises to offset the higher costs of domestic production. These could be structured to help with the purchase of new equipment or training of workers, but this can also include smaller businesses such as the mom and pop shops that are the ones buying these finished products that are manufactured and then getting them to retail. And then, of course, there's the streamlined regulations, and I know this is a really sticky one, but simplifying the permitting process for new manufacturing facilities, but while maintaining essential environmental safeguards. This could involve creating dedicated fast track programs or providing technical assistance to help them navigate the regulatory landscape. And please just try not to complicate it so much. Now, of course, the workforce development programs that exist or could exist, investing in training and education programs tailored to the needs of small manufacturers to create a skilled workforce that meets their specific needs. This could include apprenticeships, on-the-job training, or partnerships with community colleges. And then, of course, there's the R&D funding. So support research and development in advanced manufacturing technologies that are accessible and affordable for small businesses to make the US production really more competitive globally. So there is also the supply chain support. So provide assistance to small businesses in developing domestic supply chains, connect them with US suppliers, and then offer financing for retooling. This could involve creating online platforms to connect buyers and suppliers, or provide low interest loans to help businesses invest in new equipment. And some may say that we already have these incentives in place. But honestly, I remember having to jump through so many hoops to start certain businesses, and it just kept pushing me further and further into more of the service-based business rather than products. But it's really about creating a level playing field and empowering these businesses to be a part of that reshoring effort. So as we've seen, the relationship between tariffs and inflation is complex. Tariffs can contribute to higher prices, but they're not the only factor at play. And while reshoring manufacturing is a worthy goal, it's a long-term process with significant challenges, especially for small businesses. This involves a combination of strategic incentives with a focus on supporting small businesses, the workforce development, and pretty much a realistic understanding of the global economy. I mean, we just need policies that not only encourage a large-scale manufacturing to really start coming in here, but also empower the small businesses that are crucial to our economy. I would really love to hear from you about what you think is the best way to encourage domestic manufacturing and how can we ensure that small businesses are not left behind. I really appreciate your time here, and I will see you in the comments below. Stay informed and stay empowered on your next level up, and I will catch you right back here on the next one.